Day. This is your co-host, Dr. Ning.
And I'm your co-host, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us. I am joined today by Madeline Long. She is a longtime friend and a powerful advocate for women. She is a former breast cancer survivor herself and has impacted countless lives across both the Washington, D.C., St. Louis, and really national health communities. Look forward to introducing you and getting to know a little bit more about your story. So Madeline, thank you so much for joining us today. Love to hear a little bit more hear from the woman herself. Tell us how you got here.
How I got here. Well, you know what? I'm going to start with thank you, Rachel. I'm going to say first to Dr. Ning that you have like the most amazing co-host with you. When I met Rachel, it was love at first sight. So I say to everyone, and we have really messed people up with this. I will introduce her as my niece.
Yeah.
And some people
I guess it's mutual because Rachel spoke highly about you all the time. So.
Yeah. And so I thank both of you for coming on, and you guys are discussing something that's near and dear to my heart because I am always on the battlefield for women. From ending violence against women and improving health outcomes for women. Those are the two areas that mean the most to me. And I know that Rachel, you said or shared that I am a breast cancer survivor, and I am, but I count it a blessing that I was in the breast cancer space long before I became a survivor. And so, my story is that, a dear friend of the family passed away from breast cancer. And at her funeral, people, when they said, what did she die from? And this was in 98. They were whispering, it's breast cancer. And I was like, well, why are we whispering? And I actually went in search of who could I work with to better understand why we are whispering about breast cancer. Because we all know that back in the day, people didn't really talk about breast cancer. Or any cancer, you're right, Dr. Ning. So I started volunteering for the Susan G. Komen Foundation, and later became an advocate in science, which meant that I spent time with the researchers, and then I would take that information back out into communities of color. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for many years, and then I became an ambassador for the American Cancer Society Know Your Girls breast cancer program. And then most recently, American Cancer Society launched an amazing study for Black women's health, because there's really no data for Black women. So they have a program called Voices of Black Women, and their goal is to get 100,000 women and to study them over 30 years. And it's an observational study. So what I love about it is we know, the stories about Henrietta Lacks, we know the story about Tuskegee. This is not that type of study. And so I'm a little disappointed that Black women aren't signing up. But then we also have to understand it's the trust factor. And so what I try to say to researchers, when you're coming into communities of color, address the elephant in the room. Do not come into the room and just say, we're here to help. They don't need the cavalry. They need to feel like their information and their data is going to be used properly. Mm-hmm. And they also need to know that someone really cares. And so that's what I'm doing in the breast cancer space. And I'm also a licensed patient navigator. So there are organizations that will reach out to me when there are, when they have a difficult breast cancer patient that, sometimes, I know this may sound strange, but sometimes you'll get a breast cancer patient that's diagnosed with breast cancer, and then they will just check out psychologically and not want to go back in. And so they will hire me to navigate that patient through the process. So I'm either navigating them in person, or because of technology, I'm able to be with patients through FaceTime. So they'll literally take the phone into their appointment, and I sit with them and I ask the doctors the questions, because what I do know as a breast cancer survivor, when they tell you, I'm sorry to tell you you have breast cancer, the world stops. All you can remember is, I'm sorry to tell you. So you know how Charlie Brown is like the womp, 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 womp. Even though I had been in the space from 1999, I wasn't diagnosed until 2011. When they called me, now that was one thing that I had a problem with, that I had to hear that diagnosis over the phone. So you don't know if I'm in the car driving, you don't know where I am. You didn't have the sensitivity to say, Dr. So-and-so wants you to come in because they want to discuss your test results. No. You tell me this, I'm standing at the time right in front of my daughter. And I had to play it off like, oh, okay, well, Dr. So-and-so, I'll talk to you later. I will. And I was running a center on a college campus. I walked to the end of the campus where there was no one but just myself. Now, remember, I told you I've been in this space since 99.
20 years after.
I slid down on that wall and I just cried, because I never thought that would be my diagnosis.
Yeah.
Was that from a regular screening?
Well, before my screening, my aunt was diagnosed. My aunt asked my mom to go and get a mammogram. My mom was diagnosed 6 months after my aunt.
Wow.
My mom looked at me when I came home to be with her, and she said, when was the last time you had a mammogram? Now, remember, I was with COVID, so I was having mammograms every year. My mom said, I need you to go back and get a mammogram. So I tell people all the time, the mammogram didn't save my life. My mom saved my life. Because my mom said, go get another mammogram. The moment they heard about my aunt and my mom, this is when I realized there's a screening mammogram, there's a diagnostic mammogram, and now we have the 3D and there's some other things. But all those years, I was having a screening mammogram. And even though they said they would see something, I also realized density, especially for women of color, is very different. So they couldn't really see what was going on with my breast. And they had me to come and get a diagnostic mammogram that led to an ultrasound, to a biopsy, to, I'm sorry to tell you, you have breast cancer. And I had mammograms for 7 years before my mother ever was diagnosed.
And
So I am curious.
sorry, I'm just curious, how long has it been since your last mammogram when you did that new test?
8 months.
8 months.
Wow. So let me ask you the difference between the screening and the diagnostic mammogram. How did you learn that they're different, and how can people get more resources to understand that, to your point, the results may be different?
Well, I found out there was a difference because for many years when I would go to the Siteman Cancer Center to have my mammogram, you would always go through one door. The moment that they found out that my mom and my aunt had breast cancer, I went through another door. So I said, why am I going to this side when I normally go to this side? And they said, oh, you have to have a diagnostic mammogram and not a screening mammogram.
Wow.
So I started asking the questions. But when I also said, let me see my records, my records showed that they saw calcification before, but they were like, well, sometimes calcification can be something and then sometimes it's not. But when were you going to tell the patient?
Yeah.
I deserve for them to tell me.
Yeah.
One, that I had very dense breasts, and I deserved for them to tell me that they saw calcification.
Absolutely.
And a further test may be needed
Exactly.
to confirm it.
And that's why that density law is very, very important, that the FDA changed the regs around density, because they weren't telling women that the density matters when you have a mammogram.
Yep.
Who do you think who should be tested? Who should get screened? Who should undergo diagnostic testing?
I truly believe if you are at high risk, and so someone who is, a high, family of breast cancer, they should definitely be, and they should go into a protocol where they're not just getting a mammogram, but they're also getting an MRI.
Wow.
The other thing is they need to know how the density. They need, because density is equivalent to trying to find a P in the clouds. So think about that. If you were looking really hard through clouds, you may or may not see that P. So that cancer could be present and you don't even see it. But again, ladies, I go back to, if my mom didn't insist that I go back and get a mammogram and tell them about your family history, they weren't going to tell me about density. They weren't going to tell me anything about, that we saw some calcification a couple of years back. Okay, so when were you going to share that with me? And so now when I go out to speak, I'm not the person that just says, oh, I just think women should let's increase your screenings. Let's go a little more in depth about what that means. Women need to understand that you need to ask about your density. Women need to know that you may need, just like Dr. Neen said, you may need additional testing. And then if there's a suspicious finding, don't suffer in silence. You need to go in. Just because it's a suspicious finding does not necessarily mean that it just could be that it could be what they call the precancerous cells. There could be, not precancerous, atypical. I mean, it's just so many things that it could be, but you won't know that. And if you know what's going on, and that's why I'm so happy that this is entitled Show Up in Your Own Life, you have to know, you got to get the data. Because only with data can you make better informed decisions. You can't do that by shying away from it and just having the conversations with your friends. And if you find that you are that person that does not want to go to the doctor alone, ask a girlfriend, ask a friend to go with you. And if it's not a girlfriend, most hospitals now have nurse navigators. and you can ask for that. But it's important to know what's going on with your health, because the numbers of women, especially women of color, we're the ones that are dying from breast cancer. And a lot of it is because we drop out of sight. It's lost to follow-up. That's the term that I was looking for. The loss to follow-up rate is very, very high, because a lot of women will go in and they will get the mammogram, but they don't return.
Wow. So I'm curious, in terms of, you have vast experience. You have gone through it yourself. You have advocated for women. You have created support communities for women. You've been on the research and development side, on the med device for detection. Tell us a little bit more about, since you were diagnosed in 2011, tell us more. So from that point, how has your story and how is, your contribution to this world is so large? Tell us more about that.
So, Rachel, Dr. Neen, sometimes people can know too much. Rachel knows too much about me. That's the biggest problem, because she is right. I became, my nickname is Health Crusader. So I wanted to not only to be the person walking the halls of Congress to get law, regulations and laws and things passed for breast cancer, but I wanted to be on the research and development side. I worked for a company that they did breast cancer screenings with a device, because a lot of women were complaining about the pain of the mammogram. So this particular device was one that was, I think the term was textile. So they were able to determine from the imaging of the breast to around heat. And so they were able to see what was going on. It was very, very similar to an ultrasound, if I had to say what it's compared to. But beyond the device, I then wanted to be on more of the clinical, genetic testing and clinical trials. Because when we look at communities of color, less than 4% in our community are getting participating in genetic testing or clinical trials. And so when I go out and I'm speaking to groups, the first thing that someone will say to me is, well, you know what happened with the Henrietta Lacks? They used her stuff and she never in the family, whatever. And I said, do you realize that? And they said, oh, and I'm not going to, no one's going to get my data. I said, do you realize that when you take medication, because we don't participate in clinical trials, you do know you're a guinea pig at that point. Did you know that? They look at, that's it, because they didn't use our data. So that's not based on anything that comes from our community. It does not, that is how we get to change the trajectory of health outcomes in our community by participating. And so, yes, started out with advocacy, moved to, the devices. What can we do? But the reason that I am participating with the Voices of Black Women study is because we have to become data-driven. And it's only by the data can we change the health outcome, especially in communities of color. I know that there's a lot of things that have happened. And I'm not, by no means am I saying it wasn't bad, it wasn't terrible, but that cannot determine our path forward. Without the data to drive the science, we're always going to be on the bottom end of when you think about you think about heart health, when you think about breast cancer, when you think when you go down the list, it's people of color, African Americans. And so I'm constantly the one that companies will say, can we work with you to be that voice to go out front? Because they know I'm going to call the question. They know that I'm going to walk in that room and say to someone who looks like me, especially older women, I'll say to them all the time, it's not for us, it's for the women that come behind us. I don't want my daughter or my granddaughters to ever go through what my mom, with my aunt, and what I had to go through. I don't want them to have that. And the only way we're going to change that is by participating in getting the genetic testing. Now they have a test where I found out that they can do, they can find out if you're going to have Alzheimer's. That is amazing. But how will we change it if we don't take the test? It's not going to just show up in your house and just test you and then leave. You have to ask for it. So now I'm actually over the last, I guess, month or so, I've been speaking to different groups and saying to them, you do know there's a test for that. So I want you to go and get that test. Oh, well, what happens if you find out that I have it? Okay, so what then? That means that you stop living? No, it means now you can make some decisions, because now you have something you have some data to show you that you may need to change some of the things you're doing in your life.
Yeah, Madeline, I cannot tell you how happy I am right now. I'm so glad that Rachel was able to get you into our studio. You know, as a researcher, I agree with you 120% about the importance of evidence-based medicine. And all of us at some point will become a patient. And all of us play a role in that evidence generation. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm the PI of a clinical trial right now. Mm-hmm. And it's just about like asthma, right? You would think that's a common condition and it should be easy to recruit patients, but still so many people are reluctant to participate, and that's the biggest hurdle all clinical trials face, and especially among minority groups like people with color, people, racial minority groups, including Asians. It's a constant struggle because they don't want to be the guinea pig there, right, in the trial phase. But eventually, as you said, they are going to be the guinea pig in the real clinical when they get sick, right? Because there's no data show what's the optimum dose for them, right? And what is the optimum treatment for them. Mm-hmm. And we're like, different racial groups can be so different, like in genetics, in their lifestyle, in their just overall phenotype. So I'm so thankful for all the work you do in your community and in nationwide.